everything becomes obsolete at the point. There will come some time in the future when we're not, carrying phones around, and we'll watch movies where people have phones and we'll be like, yeah, look at how primitive they were.
Welcome to the stream. How you doing, Marc?
Hey, what's happening?
Great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
A lot. It's a little bit of a slow news day, but exciting stuff with GPT, open source.
It's not a slow August.
It's not a slow August. We're glad. We were just reflecting that we've taken exactly one day off this summer. That was July 4th, and we're showing the Europeans how American companies work.
American work.
We're setting an example, and we have proof of work because we exist on the internet, and you can see us live every day. So we're setting an example. How are you doing? How's your summer going?
Fantastic, going really well. So how long is it going to be until you guys put up avatars that make claims that you're working hard all through the summer, but it turns out you're on the beach?
You might have caught us.
I think you'll know better than us as to when the technology gets there. We've been demoing some of the stuff. People have been doing a lot of deep fakes of us, and fortunately, all of them have been clockable, so it doesn't feel like a brand risk, but they're getting closer and closer. And I know that there's going to be a moment when we have to say, hey, that's actually using our name and likeness to endorse something that we don't necessarily endorse. Can you please take that down? So we're approaching the Turing test, the uncanny valley. We're escaping the uncanny valley.
I think a question, like looking back over the, maybe 10 or 15 years, was what moments did you feel like there just was not a lot of action happening? Because this summer is just the pace from so many different teams has been absolutely insane. Everybody's like trying to keep up. And it didn't used to feel that way, at least from my point of view.
So my view of it always is there's these disconnected, kind of patterns or trends. There's sort of the sort of day-to-day phenomenon where like engineers show up every day and they make things a little bit better. And then every once in a while, you get a technical breakthrough or a new platform. And that process, kind of this, kind of sawtooth, kind of up to the right kind of process kind of plays out over time, kind of regardless of what else is happening in the world. And so it keeps happening through recessions and depressions and wars and like all kinds of crazy stuff that's happening. But basically, the technology keeps getting better. So there's kind of that curve. And then there's the sort of enthusiasm curve and then the adoption curve, which is basically like, when do these things actually show up in the world? And then, by the way, when are people actually ready, for the new thing? Like if you talk to the people who worked on I'm sure you guys have talked to people who work on language models, they will tell you that they were surprised that ChatGPT was the breakthrough moment because they thought everybody already knew what these models could do for, 3 years before that. And so they were shocked that it was the chatbot interface that made the thing go. And so there's somewhat of a sort of arbitrary disconnection between what's actually happening in the substance and then what people are seeing and feeling. And so it's really hard to predict when these things pop. But also, if you're in this day to day, it's really hard to tell when things are going to be hot or not. Because it doesn't necessarily map to how much the technology is improving.
Yeah, we were just talking about that in the context of Google's new world model. It's this like generative video game that you can kind of move around in. And it feels like DeepMind is just absolutely crushing at the AI research frontier. They have the best world model simulator that you can walk around in. The question is like, if they let another lab do the ChatGPT thing and just get it out into the consumer 3 months earlier, they might wind up kind of chasing and trying to catch up if somebody actually figures out how to make it like a dominant consumer product. Now, in the enterprise, it's more oligopolistic, but consumer seems to be winner take all. I guess the question is like, how much value do you place right now in the AI race to just like moving fast, breaking things, having like the thick skin to deal with like the safety constraints and all of the different stuff, obviously not being irresponsible, but just speeding up the organization as much as possible. It feels like now is the time to really push on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I need to correct you. It's moving fast and making things. I don't know where
that's right.
I don't even know where that came from.
Yeah.
I have no idea what
never heard of it.
I mean, ChatGPT didn't really break anything. I think that's a good point. It really did just move fast and make things. The first things it made were weird, but that was fine. And it failed and it hallucinated a ton, but it didn't really break anything. I don't know.
Yeah, I believe in this case, total deaths attributable to ChatGPT are still zero.
Zero.
So notwithstanding all of the caterwauling, but
Yep.
Yeah. So look, I think the AI industry in particular has a very acute version of the sort of challenge that you identified with, and I don't say this negatively, just an observation, which is that they're like in sort of a normal technology company, you've kind of got engineers who make products, and then you've got kind of salespeople or marketing people who sell them. in the AI companies, you have this third tier of, the quote unquote researchers,
Yeah.
right? And so, which has worked out incredibly well. I mean, the researchers have done, they've just done like amazing breakthroughs at these companies. But, the handoff, there's not necessarily a clean handoff from the researchers to the market. And so it kind of raises this question of like, okay, like, are these companies therefore kind of three segment companies where they have research and then they have product development, and then they have go to market. And I think that's a really open issue. I mean, if Google's kind of a case study of this. You alluded to DeepMind, but even more broadly, Google developed a transformer in 2017, and then they basically let it sit on the shelf, right? Because it was a research project. They didn't productize it. They were very worried about, from people I've talked to, they were very worried about the, brand issues and safety issues. Kind of all these. They had all these reasons to not productize it. I talked to somebody senior who was there at the time, and I asked them, when could you have had ChatGPT with GPT-4 level output, if you had just gone flat out starting in 2017? And they said by 2019.
Yeah.
They already knew how to do it, and then they've now caught up, but it took an extra 5 years to catch up. And so I think a lot of these companies kind of have that challenge. Elon, as usual, of course, is provoking this question, as I'm sure you guys talked about. But he has now, within XAI, he's now collapsed. He's eliminated the distinction between research and product. Yeah. And so, of course, he's pushing this as hard as he can. And I think it's a good question for a lot of these other companies, kind of how hard they want to push on actually getting these things in fully productized form out to the market.
Yeah. On Elon's distinction, it feels like there is more research to be done, but it feels like we're entering like a new cycle of just focus on the engineering, focus on the deployment, the applications. Let's get all this technology out into the world. Let's reap all that benefit. And yes, there will be a different track of fundamental research that's happening somewhere, but it's really, really hard to predict. And so if you have something that's working, just double down and just go really aggressive on it. I'm wondering more on that, but also on Apple's strategy. It feels like Apple's been kind of like, people have been maligning them for missing the AI opportunity. And Tim Cook's just there on the earnings call being like, look, we acquired a couple small companies and
this year.
7 companies. But then it
AI.
seems like they're taking more of like an American dynamism approach. Like there was news today in the Journal that they're investing $100 million in American manufacturing. They're certainly doing stuff. They're just not chasing the shiny tennis ball.
Headline $100 billion capex.
Right? So I'm wondering about your thoughts on when you have when you have a platform. How hard is it to resist chasing the new shiny object? Is that the right move, or are there any other things that you think Apple should be changing their strategy on?
Yeah, so look, Apple's always had this, very clearly defined strategy that, Steve and Tim, working together figured out a long time ago, which is, I forget the exact term, but it's something like basically they invest deeply into the core of what they do. They'll basically work internally on things for many years. They only actually release things when they feel like they're kind of fully baked.
Yeah.
Right. And so as a consequence, they have this thing where, and Tim says this, right? They're rarely first to market with new technologies. They're more often in the category of what Peter Thiel calls last to market. They'll come out whatever 3 years later, whatever 5 years later. There were tablets for years before the iPad. There were smartphones for years before the iPhone.
Folding phones. They're about to do a folding phone. It's like 10 years into that technology. But I'm sure if they do it, they'll hit it.
The last mover.
Yeah. Sorry.
The last mover. And I guess, well, what I would say is like, look, that clearly works if you're Apple, right?
Yeah.
And so it clearly works if you're Apple. But I would say there's a fine line between that strategy and simply becoming obsolete, right?
Yeah.
And so the problem is like if you're not Apple, and you don't have all the other kind of super strengths and kind of now the market position that Apple has, do you really want to be a company? If you're not Apple, do you really want to be a company that basically sits there and says, yeah, the world's moving and we're very deliberately not going to lean as hard as we can into it? And so I think there's a lot of survivorship bias in these kinds of strategy discussions where people look at the one company that's able to pull this off and they don't look at the 50 other companies that are in the graveyard, because they didn't adapt. I mean, all the other smartphone companies, when the iPhone came out, they were like, oh yeah, well, we can do touch too, right? We'll just, we'll get to it, right? They're gone.
Yeah, what was it?
What do you
BlackBerry
think?
Bold, I remember, it was like an iPhone knockoff.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Right now, people are variety of shareholders are annoyed at Apple around their reaction to AI, LLMs. John's annoyed around just like transcription generally, just like super basic stuff. But it doesn't feel like the core businesses immediately threatened today. It feels like it's still on the horizon around these sort of like, eyewear-based computing, potentially net new devices that we'll see from, companies like OpenAI over time. But where do you, like how real is the threat, this year versus 10 years from today, and kind of what's your framework?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think the biggest ultimate danger, is very clear, which is just like, at what point do you not carry around a pane of glass in your hand, called a phone, because other things have superseded it. And, look, everything becomes obsolete at the point. So there will come some time in the future when we're not, carrying phones around, and we'll watch movies where people have phones, and we'll be like, yeah, look at how primitive they were, right? Because we'll have moved on to other things, and whether those things are eye based, or the other kinds of wearables, or whether it's just kind of computing happening in the environment, or just entirely voice based, or who knows what it is. But there will come a time when that happens. Is that time 3 years from now because there's like some huge breakthrough from some company that figures out the product that obsoletes the phone right away, or is that 20 years from now because the phone is just such a standard platform for everything that we do in our lives, and everything else kind of remains a peripheral to the phone. I mean, that's the game of elephants that's playing out there. Obviously, I think I think it's highly likely that we'll have a phone for a very long time.
Yeah.
Having said that, it is exciting that there are companies that are going directly at that challenge, and whoever cracks the code on that will be the next Apple. And by the way, that may in the fullness of time be Apple itself. They may be the company that figures that out.
Yeah, I remember being at a board meeting at Andreessen Horowitz maybe a decade ago or something, and Chris Dixon showed me the HoloLens. And I was
Right.
like, okay, we're 1 year away from this being
Right.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And I feel like today I'm still in the VR, it's definitely 1 year away. The next Quest I'm going to be wearing daily. And it feels like we're always there, but it does feel like Apple did a lot of work on the fundamental, pixel density of the resolution of the display. And then Meta's been doing a ton of work on just getting it light and affordable. Like, it feels closer than ever, but you always got to wait until you see the churn numbers until you really call the game, right?
Well, here's the other thing, but I think that's true. But you'd also say, I'm on the Meta board, so I'm kind of a dog in the hunt on this one. But like the Meta Ray-Ban glasses are a big hit.
Oh, totally.
Right, like they're a big. So I think we now have a form factor that we know works.
Yes.
For eye-based wearables. There's not VR, and then VR, on top of that, but. Just the glasses, and then the glasses with camera, sort of integrated camera, integrated microphone, integrated speaker.
Yep.
That's a very interesting platform. The watch clearly works, by the way, which Apple, of course, has played a significant role in making happen. That now sells in huge volume.
Yeah.
So that's the second data point. And then, look, I think these, I think some form of AI pin is going to work.
Yep.
I also think headphones are going to get a lot more sophisticated, which is already happening.
Yep.
And so you do have these kind of data points coming out, and then look, the $1 trillion question ultimately is, are these peripherals to the phone, which is what they are today, or are these replacements for the phone? And I would say I think we have a lot of invention coming, both from new companies and from the incumbents who are going to try to figure that out.
Yeah, I always think about the value of like narrowing the aperture on these new technologies. Like with the Meta Ray-Bans, I feel like the fact that they aren't also trying to be a screen is actually a feature, not a bug. And I always go back to the iPhone. Like, it was first and foremost a phone. And people bought it because it could make calls, and then it could make text messages, and then it was an iPod. But do you disagree with that, please?
Well, you guys, I don't know, you guys might be too young. The first iPhone actually was a bad phone.
How so?
Don't you guys, for the first 2 years, it couldn't reliably make phone calls?
I had like the third
bit.
one, and a friend had one, but I feel like it was still like people were carrying cell phones, and that was at least the expectation. But yeah, I mean, I guess you're right.
For the first 2 years, it was a classic Apple story, because for the first 2 years, the thing couldn't reliably make phone calls, and then it turned out there was an issue with the antenna and with how you held it, and there was the famous Steve Jobs email.
Yeah, you hold it and you would disconnect it.
You could basically brick the device.
Based on how you held it, and somebody emailed. This is when Steve would respond to emails from random people, and somebody emailed Steve saying, "If I hold the phone this way, it doesn't make phone calls." And he's like, "Well, don't hold it that way."
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
So even there, it was like, and people forget it took like 5 years for the iPhone to find its footing. It took like 2 years to get the. And remember, also the original iPhone didn't have broadband data.
Yeah.
It was on the old 2G.
1G,
it was called the AT&T Edge network. So it didn't have broadband data, and then of course it didn't have an app store. Right, it was completely locked down. Right.
So the challenges for Apple now is that people are so used to perfection with the device that launching a product that isn't perfect like is embarrassing,
Yeah.
right? Like
So
you look at the Vision Pro and
Yeah.
it's like, well, the battery's big. Steve would have hated this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Like
Right.
how he never would have shipped this, and that being constrained and not being able to innovate because you're tied to this like impossible standard of being on whatever generation 17 of the iPhone and perfecting every element is a real challenge.
So I would say there's a corollary to that. One of the things I've observed over the years is I think technology products become obsolete at the precise moment they become perfect. And to your point, what we mean by perfect basically is like, yeah, it's like the perfect idealized complete product. Like it does everything you could possibly ever imagine. Everything a customer could imagine, everything you as the technology developer can imagine, it's absolutely perfect. And there's been tons of examples of this over the last 50 years, where it's like the absolute perfect permanent. It seems to be the permanent version of that product, and then it just turns out that's actually the point of obsolescence because it means creativity is no longer being applied right into that platform. You're just like there's just nothing else to do. You're just like you're done. Right, the product has been realized, and then the cycle is what happens. To your point, the cycle is other people come in with completely different approaches, completely different kinds of products that are broken and weird in all kinds of ways, but are fundamentally different. And so, that is one of the time-honored traditions. And one of the things you could say about Tim is his willingness to kind of break the mold of Apple only ships perfect products, but being willing to ship the Vision Pro, shows a level of determination to kind of stay in the innovation game,
I like that
which I
take.
think is very positive.
Yeah. That's great.
Updated thinking on open source. Since we last
Please.
talked, there's a lot that's been
OpenAI is an
happening
open source company
yesterday.
again.
Yes,
Yeah.
OpenAI is open again.
Yes.
Yeah, look, very encouraging. A year ago, I was very, I was getting very distressed about whether open source AI was going to be allowed.
Yeah.
Right, it was even going to be legal. And I think we're basically through that at this point. We're through that in the U.S. We'll see about the rest of the world. And then look, the U.S.-China thing is obviously a big deal, but I think it's been net positive for the world that China has been so enthusiastic about open source AI coming out of China, which has been great. And then look, OpenAI leaning hard into this, and releasing what they did is I think fantastic, both because of what they released, which is great, but also just the fact that they are now willing to do that. And then Elon reconfirmed overnight that he's going to open source, start open sourcing previous versions of Grok. And so we seem to be in the timeline where open source AI is going to happen. Right now, what you would say is it kind of lags the leading edge proprietary implementations by 6 months or something like that.
Yep.
But I think that that's a good, if that's the status quo that continues, I think that would be a very good status quo.
What are the rough edges that we need to kind of sand down when we're thinking about Chinese open source models specifically? Is it we need to do some fine tuning on top of them to add back free speech, or do we need to watch for back doors? Say it's phone and home if it runs into this specific thing. Like the Chinese open source thing, it was remarkable because I feel like it really does accelerate the pace of innovation because everyone gets to see, oh, this is how reasoning works. I think that's great. At the same time, it made me much more appreciative of AI safety research and capability research and actually being able to interpret what's going on and say definitively this model is going to behave weird in this weird way, like the Manchurian candidate problem. We haven't found any of that, but it certainly seems like something we'd want to keep an eye on. But from your perspective, like what are the risks that we need to be aware of going into a world where China is really pushing hard into open source?
Yeah, there's two, and you identified them, but let's talk about both of them. So the phone home thing is the easy one, which is you can put you can packet sniff a network, and you can tell when the thing is doing that, and plus you can go in the code and you can see when it's doing that, and so you can validate that that's either happening or not happening, and I think that that's important. But I think people are gonna figure that out. You can kind of gate that problem practically.
Yeah.
The bigger issue is we have this term in the field right now called open weights, and open weights is a loaded term. It uses the open term from open source, but of course with open source the thing is you can actually read the code. With open weights you have just a giant file full of numbers, as you said, that you can't really interpret. And then what you don't have, what most of the open source open weights models don't have, including DeepSeek specifically, what they don't have is they don't have open data. right? Or open corpus, right? So you can't actually see the training data that went into them. And of course, most of the people building models are kind of obscuring what that training data is in various ways. And so when you get an open weight model, the good news is the software source is open. The good news is you can run it on your machine. You can verify that it doesn't phone home, but you don't actually know what's happening inside the weights. And so I think that is going to be a bigger and bigger issue, which is like, okay, how the thing behaves. Like, yeah, what has it actually been trained to do? And what restrictions or directives has it been given in the training, that are embedded in the weights that you need to be able to see. I would say this is coming up as sort of, I would say, a global issue, which, we worry about when these models come from China. Other countries worry when these models come from the U.S., right? Which is right. So one of the phrases you'll hear when you talk to people kind of outside the U.S. is kind of this phrase people are kicking around, which is "not my weights, not my culture."
Okay.
Right. Right. Or by the way, for that matter, not my weights, not my laws.
Yeah.
Right. Which is like, okay, like what actually is this thing going to do?
Yeah.
Right. And to your point, the Chinese models, for example, might never criticize communism or something.
Sure.
I can tell you, the American models have all kinds of constraints also.
Yeah.
Right. Implemented, usually by a very specific kind of person in a very specific location in the U.S.
Yep.
And so, I think that this is a general issue, and we're going to have to see basically people's tolerance levels being willing to run open weights models where they don't fundamentally have access to the data, and then correspondingly, I think what we'll see is more open source developers also doing open corpus, open data, so you can see what's actually in them.
Yeah. Obviously, open source is very important in terms of just distributing intelligence broadly, giving people the ability to run their own models and really fine tune them and have control. There's also the big push just to make frontier models and high capability models free. One model is you charge for the premium, you give the free away. It's a freemium model. That's what we're seeing at most of the labs right now. There's also this kind of specter on the horizon of potentially putting ads in LLMs and what that would do to the world. Jordy got in a little dust up with Marc Cuban on the timeline, deciding whether or not it would be a net good to put advertising in LLMs. What might happen that might be bad there? What do you have a take?
My point broadly was that ads have been an incredible way to make a variety of products and services online free, and just saying like default, just no ads would potentially be incredibly destructive. Curious your framework.
Yeah, so I should start by saying, like, whenever I personally use an internet service, I always try to buy the premium version of it that doesn't have ads, right? And so if I can like live personally inside an ad-free universe and pay for it, like that's great. And I'll freely admit, whatever level of hypocrisy or incongruence, kind of results from that. But
no, the point is choice. The point is choice.
Well, the point is exactly what you said. It's affordability. So the problem is, if you really want to get to if you want to get to 1 billion and then 5 billion people, you can't do that with a paid offering. Like it just you at any sort of reasonable price point, it's just not possible. The global per capita GDP is not high enough for that. People don't have enough income for that, at least today. And so if you want to get to if you want the Google search engine or the Facebook social app or the whatever AI frontier AI model to be available to 5 billion people, for free, you need to have a business model. You need to have an indirect business model, and ads is the obvious one. And so I do think if you take some principle stand against ads, I think you unfortunately are also taking a stand against broad access, just in the way the world works today. And then look, the other really salient question is, the same question that the companies like Google and Facebook have been dealing with for a long time, which is, are ads purely destructive or negative to the user experience, or are they actually, if done properly, are they actually either neutral or even positive, right? And this was something that Google, I think, to their credit, figured out very early, which is a well-targeted ad at a specifically relevant point in time is actually content. It actually enhances the experience, right? Because it's the obvious case. You're searching on a product, there's an ad, you can buy the product, you click to buy the product. That was actually a useful piece of functionality. And so, can you have ads or other things that are like ads or look like ads, different kinds of referrals, mechanisms or whatever? Can you have them in such a way that they're actually additive to the product experience? And you could imagine, just like with search and with social networking, you could imagine lots of examples of that. People will, they'll whine or howl about that in lots of different ways. But I think that hasn't been a bad outcome overall. And I think that I think it's entirely possible that that's what happens with these models as well.
Yeah.
So, kind of similar kind of question. What should be legal? Kind of trying to create legal frameworks on a number of issues with AI. There's been a number of IP cases that have been working their way through the courts. What can labs use to train models, et cetera? There's been some good outcomes recently. Sam also was talking about how a lot of people are using AI as like a confidant, like a friend, things like that. And he mentioned that currently your chats are not privileged. They can be used in a lawsuit or other situations. How optimistic are you that our sort of legal system in the U.S. can get some of these issues right, where maybe it can't just be total free markets, kind of lawless, whatever goes?
So in the case of training data, I think that there's a bunch of these copyright, kind of lawsuits happening right now. There's, the big New York Times OpenAI one, and there's, been a bunch of others. I think for that particular problem, my guess is that problem ultimately has to be solved through legislation. It's ultimately a legislative question. The reason is because it goes to the nature of copyright law itself, which is legislation, and of course, the content industry is already claiming that, of course, using copyrighted data to train, without permission and without paying is sort of, they believe illegal on its face, due to violation of copyright law. The counter argument to that, which we believe is, well, it's not copying, right? There's a distinction between training and copying. Just like in the real world, there's a distinction between reading a book and copying the book, as a person. And so there's going to need, I think, the courts are trying to grapple with that. There's a whole bunch of cases. There's jurisdictional questions. Probably ultimately Congress is going to have to figure out figure out an answer on that. And by the way, the president has kind of, thrown down that gauntlet in his, I think, the speech he gave last week or 2 weeks ago, where he said that, Washington probably needs to deal with that as an issue. So that's one. On the privacy thing, I think that one feels like it's a Supreme Court thing. To me, it feels like that's the kind of issue set at the Supreme Court. And in other words, like whether, for example, your chat transcripts are considered your property and whether they're protected against, warrantless search and seizure. Mm-hmm. And the observation I would make there is, if you look at the march of technology over time, so the Constitution has like very clear, Fourth, Fifth Amendments, very specific rights around the things that are yours, such as, your home, being in your home. By the way, the thoughts in your head, right? That the government can't just like come in and take. They can't just come in and search your house without a warrant. Mm-hmm. They can't put you in a jail cell and beat you until you fess up. There are we have constitutional protections against the government being able to basically, take information, fundamentally. As well as possessions. And then basically what happens is every time there's a new technology that creates a new kind of sort of, thing that you own, thing that's yours, thing that you would consider to be private, thing that you wouldn't want the government to be able to take without a warrant. Out of the gate, law enforcement agencies just naturally go try to get those things because they're ways to solve crimes, and it feels like that's a legal thing to do. And then basically the courts come in later and they rule one way or the other and basically say no, that actually is also a thing that is protected against warrantless, for example, warrantless search, or warrantless wiretapping. And so I feel like that this is the latest of probably 20 of those over the last 100 years. And I don't know which way it'll go, but I think it's going to be a key thing because as people are already telling these models lots of things that they're that are very personal.
Okay, lightning round, quick questions. We're letting you get out of here in a couple minutes. We're in this age of spiky intelligence. Models are great at some things and then terrible at others. Where are you actually getting value out of AI right now? Where is it falling down for you? How are you using AI day to day?
Yeah, so I have two kind of, barbell approach. One is for serious stuff. I love the deep research capabilities. Yeah. And I'm doing this in a bunch of models, but like the ability to basically say, I'm interested in this topic. And then I just felt like write me a book. And I'm kind of hoping for the longest book I can get. I always tell it like, go longer, more sophisticated. But the leading edge models now, they're getting up to like 30-page PDFs, that are like completely well formulated, basically long form essays. With just like incredible richness and depth. If it's 30 pages today, I'm sort of crossing my fingers that it'll get to, 300 pages coming up here in the next few years. And so I'm able to basically have the thing generate enormous amounts of reading material with just like, I think, incredible richness and depth and complexity. And then on the other side of the barbell is humor. And I've posted some of these to my X feed over the last couple of years, but I think these models are already much funnier than people give them credit for.
Really?
I think they're actually quite highly entertaining. A while ago,
I had specific formats,
like prompts, or is it just chatting back and forth?
Be Marc Andreessen, that format.
Take a dip in my pool in my office.
They're really good. So they're really good at green text.
Yep.
That works really well. But the for some reason the ones I find hysterical are the I have it write screenplays. For like
Oh,
TV shows
okay.
or plays or movies. I posted I had it write a new season of the HBO Silicon Valley.
There
Set
you
10 years
go.
later.
Yep.
And I had it write like I had it write like 10 scripts for a complete season. And of course, I just said, make it like Silicon Valley, except, it's happening it's in 2021 at kind of peak woke. And I thought it was just, I think it's just, I'll sit there at 2 a.m. and just like laughing my ass off at how funny this thing is. And so I think these things are actually already like extremely funny. They're extremely entertaining when they're used in that way. And I do enjoy that a lot. And I generate a lot of those that I don't post, which
Stay in the group chats.
It's probably a good
sometimes
idea.
even
Exactly.
They're your property.
Yeah, hopefully the Fourth
Yes.
Amendment holds on these.
Yeah.
That's great. I have one last question.
Go for it, and then I've got one more.
How do you get a job as a venture capitalist in 2025?
So I mean, look, the best way to do it is to have a track record early as somebody who is like in the loop specifically on new product development. And so somebody who, be like deeply in the trenches at one of these new companies in one of these spaces, participate in the creation of a great new product. And a great new company, and really demonstrate that you know how to do that. There are great VCs who have not done that, but I think that is sort of a foundational skill set. For working with the kinds of founders that you want to work with, who are going to want you to have kind of very interesting things to say on that. I think that still the best way to do it.
Yeah, like feel the growth, immerse yourself
Yes.
in the growth,
Yeah.
the aggressive growth environment, and then you'll be able to identify it when you see it from afar.
Yeah, that's right.
Jordy.
Last question for me. State of M&A in your mind, how are you advising, companies where you're on the board or just the portfolio broadly around what they should expect now and in the near future?
You mean in terms of whether you can get things approved, or
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, yes. So look, approval is not a slam dunk. I just saw there was a medical device company this morning, where the acquisition was not allowed by the FTC. So, look, there is still scrutiny. It's obviously a very different political regime in Washington, but this is not by their own statements, this is not an administration that believes in total laissez-faire M&A, and it definitely wants to, in their view, maintain a very healthy level of market competition.
How many
so I think
do you expect? Do you expect certain companies to be negatively impacted by the Figma story, right? You have this deal gets blocked, successful, IPO. Lena Khan is taking a victory lap. Many people are responding and joking, saying, Lena cuts off the arm of a pianist and they endure and can create a masterpiece.
Right.
And then, and so I expect, and then you look at the example with, Roomba, I think it was, where Roomba had a deal with Amazon, it was blocked and
fell apart.
And the company has just
way
been in
down.
shambles ever since. So my concern is that people look at Figma and say, you should be independent, you just figure it out.
Nothing can go wrong.
Yes. Yeah, Ms. Khan taking a victory lap was very disconcerting, and for exactly the reason you said, which is survivorship bias, right? Which is you pick the one that worked out, and then it's the airplane, the red dots, the airplane
Yeah.
meme.
Yep.
You ignore the 50 that are in the ground that you've never heard of, and so that was very disconcerting because that it's sort of the central planning fallacy, which is like we make centrally planned economic decisions. We have one example. It's like in Europe. It's like, yeah, well, the bottle caps actually don't fall off the bottle, right? Like, it works. Right. It's like, okay, but do you want to live in an economic regime in which the government is dictating bottle cap design? The answer is clearly no.
Yep.
Because the downside consequences
Or
are
even
thousands of weight,
looking
right?
at that, the Chinese model, which is, people can say they're picking winners, but to get to maybe picking a winner, you have this intense bloodbath of competition where, teams need to rise to the top and sort of prove themselves before they get any of that real, meaningful state benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so you just have this adverse selection survivorship bias thing where you don't pay attention to all the collateral damage. So I do think that mentality is like super dangerous. And so yeah, look, I think companies just have to be very thoughtful about this, both acquirers and the acquirees. The big thing is if you're selling a company, like you just need to anticipate that you might not get it through, and if you don't, they're like, okay, number one, is there like a big enough breakup fee, right? Are you going to get paid for the damage that you're going through, and how is that structured on the one hand, and then two is look, do you have the kind of company culture that's going to be able to withstand that? and is your business, strong enough to be able to get through that? And it is a real risk and something worth, taking very seriously.
Yeah, and that's why it felt emotional. We were at NICE last week. It felt emotional. That the Figma team was able to like effectively just like restart the business and say like we're taking this all the way. So
if you talk, way to think about it, if you talk to any really successful company, what they'll tell you is, over the years we had these like crucible moments in which like we almost died, right? But we like pulled together and we pulled it off, and then that became like one of these central kind of mythical events in the history of the company that we always refer to, and like, my God, we got through that, and we're so strong and tough, and we've been forged in fire, and now we can do anything. And it's like, yeah, that's great. And then there's 50 other companies that hit those crucible moments, blew up, and died. Right? And so, like it's all of the quote lessons learned on this stuff. They're all conditional on like survival. Yeah. And so these things need to be taken incredibly seriously. Which the great CEOs do.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining. We'll let you get back to your day. We already kept you 5 minutes over. Next time we have to book 5 hours because this is fantastic. I got 10% of the way through.
24-hour TBPN.
Yeah, we would love to have you again.
Marathon.
This is a lot of fun. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon, Mark. Have a great day. Bye.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.